Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, July 1st, 2025. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about something that I hear a lot about. People ask me a lot of questions about this concept of going no contact. I want to talk about it from the perspective of the parent, and I want to talk about it from the perspective if you're the one considering no contact in this process. One of the things I want to say before I begin is whenever I'm doing therapy or teaching, often I'll give an example of something that I might do or something that one might do. And so often that gets interpreted as a should. And really, what I'm suggesting is that there's another option, that there are really a virtual infinite number of options to choose from. You may have chosen yours, and that's a viable one, that's a valid one, but there is another option so that you know that you're making a choice. But by no means, especially on the verge of doing tonight's broadcast, do I want to talk about it in terms of should, because this is a very sacred and personal decision for anyone to make. And if you've been on the receiving end of somebody going no contact, then you know how painful this can be. So I want to take this as sincerely as I can, specifically with regard to the no should rule that I talk about often, or the no should mentality. Before I get into the topic anymore, I want to talk about our events and our housekeeping. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on both Amazon and Audible. If you are interested in one of our Finding You intensives, our next available offering is August 13th through 17th. That is beginning to fill. I just announced it. That's the last one that I'm planning to run for 2025. So if you've been waiting for an opportunity to do some work with me, August 13th is that option. September 3rd through 7th is the workshop after that, the intensive after that, then October 1st through 5th, November 5th through 9th. And we have them listed on the website all the way throughout the rest of the year. If you're interested in a coach or a therapist who works with the Finding You model, this attachment-based, analytically informed therapy, the kind of things that I teach, then contact us at info@findingyouprograms.com. You can ask us inquiries, anything from private intensives, any requests, any suggestions. I am going to be hosting something very unique this fall, October 12th through 17th in Rhinebeck, New York, at the Omega Institute. This is a 5-day workshop based on the book, The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self. I'll be co-leading this with my daughter, Emma Reedy June. So if you've worked with her or you know her, you know how special that is that she's going to be with me. October 12th through 17th. For members, it's $470. For people that are not members, it's $575, and that's a 5-day workshop, a really wonderful value. If you are a Finding You alumni, this will be different than the Finding You intensive. It will be a mix between lecturing, question and answer, and also exercises, helping you get in contact with the unconscious parts of yourself and learning to love them. And I've been saying this for a while now. Any day now, we're going to be launching our Finding You Inner Circle. That's a subscription and a support of the Finding You podcast, $100 per year, $10 per month. What that gives you is access to these live broadcasts. If you're a Finding You alumni of specifically our Finding You programs, then you're automatically enrolled. If not, then this is an opportunity to gain access to those live broadcasts like I'm doing right now. I'll have a couple of broadcasts per month that'll only be available to the Finding You Inner Circle. So if you're interested, contact us at info@findingyouprograms.com or go to our website. Recently, I was talking to a friend, and I've heard this question before. I think it's fascinating. A friend asked me, was really marveling at how in our dreams we can have an incident where a character jumps out and startles us, maybe from around a corner. How is it, we were discussing, how is it that we can be both surprised by this incident, but also the author of the dream? We're the one who put the character in place who jumps out and scares us. There's nobody else that's contributed to this dream. It's all being made up by our mind. And as I thought about that for a day, I didn't have the answer about why that happens, except for this. I think it's a game. I think it's our unconscious showing off. I think it's showing us that there are things about ourselves that we don't know. And that can be really well illustrated by this example of walking through your dream and having something come out and startle you. It's your subconscious mind, your unconscious mind, telling you what it's capable of. And really what that speaks to is that speaks to the fact that there is a vast ocean of unconscious material and energies that are really driving our behaviors. So if we are to heal, if we are to grow, if we are to expand, if we are to become more aware, if we're to find peace, it is our job, our opportunity to become more familiar with what is unconscious, what has been buried, what has been relegated to this dark part of our psyche because we have found it to be so threatening or inadmissible to the big people around us. So tonight, the idea that there is an unconscious, that there are things that are largely driving our behavior, as opposed to this idea that most of us have, this kind of ego-centered consciousness that we think is making all the decisions, but really, so many of our decisions are being fueled by this unconscious, unexplored, unknown to us energy that lies beneath the surface. So that's a preamble to tonight's broadcast. And that helps us if we are the ones on the receiving end of somebody going no contact with us, that there may be things that we're not aware of. There may be ways that we're showing up. Right? That's what that trick of the mind in the dream is showing us. It's showing us that there are parts of you that you don't see. Have you ever had, everybody's had this kind of incident where something happens to you and you find out something about yourself that you didn't know? You thought, I would be more compassionate in this story, right? The old joke that I love to tell, that there is such a thing, as a perfect parent. They just haven't had kids yet. That idea that until we're in that situation, until we're walking in those shoes, we don't really know what we're made of. So with that preamble again, let me get into the content more specifically for tonight's broadcast. The first idea that I want to share with you is that this idea that boundaries aren't necessarily walls. Boundaries aren't walls, they are doors. It's us telling people how to stay in contact with us, how we would like to be treated. Ultimately, we can learn to see that a boundary is an attempt for true connection. That when somebody says, I don't like that, or here's my boundary, that's them telling us where we can enter and remain in contact with their lives. And we don't get to decide that, and some of those are non-negotiable. And that goes for us too. When you get afraid of setting a boundary with somebody, and most likely that fear comes, or at least is contributed to, from our history, where we have confronted the big people, our caregivers, the adults in our life, in early life, about things that we felt or wanted or didn't want, anything that was going on with us. And when they were so sensitive, so fragile, that instead of welcoming that, finding a way to understand, to listen, they gave us back the message that something was wrong with us. That if we caused our parents pain, if we dented or scratched their ego, then ultimately we left with this feeling of, I did something wrong, when in reality, asking for what you need is an attempt for self-care. It's an attempt to remain in contact, to build intimacy with other people. But we don't have that emotional experience, partly because of this historical occurrence of tiptoeing around the defenses of the big people. Part of it is because we meet people like our parents. In fact, we're more likely to reach somebody at a similar level of consciousness as our parents, with similar styles and defenses. On the surface, it can be very confusing because they can look different, have different socioeconomic status, different education, different preferences, different hobbies, different likes and dislikes. But the thing that we gravitate towards is somebody who has a similar level of consciousness, similar boundaries, similar defenses. So if you were like most children, in order to maintain, to assure proximity of the caregivers, if you were constantly finding yourself learning how to navigate somebody's narcissistic wounding that they haven't healed, that is your parents, then you'll find people with that similar level of consciousness around their wounding. It will be familiar to you. And in the early stages of relationship, it will be what draws you to them. We don't marry the narcissist in spite of their narcissism. We marry them because of their narcissism, because it's familiar to us. Because in the early phases of, for example, courtship, we're able to successfully navigate somebody's health and pathology, their defensiveness. And when we do that, they tell us in so many words that we are good. And we call that experience falling in love. So this idea that people aren't who they tell us they are in the beginning, that's true. But at an unconscious level, this vast ocean, right? This 90% of the iceberg beneath the surface is really calling the shots. It's really the thing that gives us this nearly psychotic experience of falling head over heels in love. Something that I've taught for many years is that you don't get to decide what people feel. When I teach parents or partners about this, you don't get to decide what hurt somebody or didn't. When somebody says they are hurt, we can learn to believe them. And this realization, this acceptance of their hurt, doesn't necessitate any specific reparations on your part. You can be present with them, understand them, hold space for them. And the more healing, the more work that you have done, in other words, healing is not eradicating our wounds. In a sense, it is holding our own woundedness, knowing that, wow, I'm fragile. Wow, I'm sensitive. Wow, I'm afraid of anger. I have an avoidance mechanism that kicks in when somebody's anger. I have a lot of shame around X, Y, or Z. It is the acceptance of who we are, at least in the first stages. And first stages, I say 20, 30, 40 years. The acceptance of who we are is what I'm talking about when I say healing often. So by your healing, by your having made peace with the parts of yourself that you were taught to hate and fear, you can stay present with other people's similar aspects. Right? That idea that you're only as healthy, your relationships are only as healthy as the relationship you have with yourself, is what I'm describing. Until you can see the scared, tantruming little child inside of you and love him or her or them, until you can do that, you virtually will have no ability to do that in your child or in others. To listen, to hold space, to contain is to be larger than. To have the experience, the wisdom, the perspective that is larger. So when parents try to gaslight their children, tell them they're being too sensitive, tell them they're overreacting, try to pull them into what they think is a higher level of development consciously, of maturity, the child is likely to retreat into a self-abusive place, right? If I can't be mad at my parents, I'm definitely angry. And so if I'm told that being angry about my parents is immature, is unaware, it's a thinking error on my part, it's my cognitive distortions. If that's the messaging from my family in so many words, then usually that anger gets turned inward, or it can get turned outward on other characters, right? We can act that out on everybody else. So we don't get to decide when other people say that they're hurt. We don't get to decide when they forgive us. They get to decide that. In fact, one of the core elements of trauma is the lack of freedom, the lack of choice in the matter. So when a therapist tries to get, for example, a client to forgive their abuser, forgive their parents, the therapist is reenacting the abuse. Jamie Gill calls it good abuse and makes the subsequent point that I don't see how good abuse can cure bad abuse. So we hold space. We let them be them. We honor it. And the irony or the paradox of allowing it is by allowing it, we're demonstrating that we're safe. By not allowing it, we're actually reinforcing the very accusation that's being levied at us. We're saying we're not safe. We have to be the good one. We cannot be the bad one. One of the questions I ask parents often, especially during adolescence when they are using consequences and leverage and sometimes finances into young adulthood. The question that I ask rhetorically is, what will happen? What will be left of the relationship when the power is gone? When your child is financially independent of you, isn't reliant on you for their basic needs, their needs to get taken care of. What will be left of the relationship? Will they want to come home for the holidays or for the vacations? Or will they just do it out of guilt and obligation because, well, that's what everybody does? A good person, a good child goes home to their family, loves their parents, pays homage to them, right? Pays respect to them. But that's not a relationship. To some extent, where there is power, there can be no intimacy. In fact, intimacy is, in many ways, understood as the absence of power. So this idea of choosing no contact that so many people are talking about these days, for me, is critically essential for healthy relationships. It must be on the table. This is a very similar idea that I teach about marriage. When people come to me and say divorce is not an option, I say it has to be an option. If divorce is not an option, then you're not choosing to stay married. You're just in some kind of psychological prison. There's no love if you're not choosing. There's no commitment if you're not choosing to stay married. And similarly, no contact, in my opinion, must be on the table. I want my children, 3 of whom are adults. 1 is very close to being an adult. I want them to hold the power of no contact with me and with everybody in our family. That keeps me accountable as a human being. In contrast, if they are morally obligated to somehow pay me back for having raised them and given them part of my life, then they're there out of guilt. Then they're there out of ego. Then the connection suffers. Then it's not real. And I'm not really accountable. So for me, no contact is not some new sweeping epidemic that is a sign of the times of the destruction of the family. For me, it is a moral idea that must be an option, or else no real deep connection is being made. I've also had this question asked of me many times. I'm afraid that my child will abandon me. And I'm going to play semantics just a little bit, but words do matter. Children don't abandon parents. It doesn't work that way. I think one of the misunderstandings about the parent-child relationship, and again, if you're not a parent and you're a listener of this podcast, I don't necessarily mean that I'm only talking to parents, because everybody that can hear my voice is the child of a parent. So just apply it to that. The relationship between the parent and child is not equal in a psychological sense. The child occupies, ideally, a different place, a different size inside of the psyche of the parent. The simplest way I can teach this is by sharing what my mother shared with me several years ago when she said, she observed and shared with me, you will never love your parents as much as they love you. And to me, this was a wonderful, generous gift of hers. Acknowledging that the people that we love are the ones that we have sacrificed for, the ones that we have served. And she was letting me off the hook and saying, don't worry about competing with my love for you, because it will never catch up. And it's true. I can't imagine even my children loving me as much as I love them. If it were so, they would never leave home and go to college and go get married, right? They would stay here. Of course, I'm joking. But the relationship is not the same. People say, well, can't I tell my child how I feel? And my answer is maybe. I mean, you can do anything you want is the answer to the literal question. But is it something that you want to do? Maybe. And maybe not. See, the child isn't designed to contain and hold space for the parent in the same way. It is too threatening, too heavy. The child is already up against it because their experience of a parent's frustration or happiness or pride or sadness or disappointment has huge implications for their sense of self. If my parents are disappointed, that presents an existential threat to me as a child. Because if they were to abandon me, I would die. I've been teaching this idea that children are helpless, that human beings, Homo sapiens, are virtually the most helpless creature at birth. And after having had my first grandchild, not being around, a newborn, for so long, a week ago today, I said to my family when I was holding her, I said, I was understating it. She is so absolutely fragile and helpless. The only adaptive behavior that she really has is crying. That's the most adaptive behavior that we have as Homo sapiens when we are born, is crying, which is I need. You have to figure out what it is I need and attend to it. But if we put children in that role, that they can abandon us, quote unquote, we are making them the parent. They are now responsible for us. And the likelihood of them splitting off parts of themselves that we find unpleasant or unacceptable is too great. And what happens when a child splits off parts of themselves is those go underground and the child becomes symptomatic. The unexpressed, unfelt even, unsaid feelings, unsaid thoughts, unsaid words now get expressed symptomatically. So that when a child ends up in treatment, the question is, what is the symptom serving? What's the unmet need? Right? That's virtually every psychologist's response to a human being in treatment. What does this serve? So if you have the thought about, if you have this fear of your child abandoning you, there's some work for you to do on your family of origin. The child is not meant to give you what your parents did not. That was their job. And where they came up short, and they all come up short, and that includes you and me. Where they come up short, then it becomes our job to find other people to parent us. Mentors, therapists, sponsors. But I don't like the idea of talking about children abandoning parents. In fact, that's the ideal, isn't it, in a certain sense? That at a certain age that they go off and leave and live their life and become occupied with the life that they're creating for themselves. If we prioritize the relationship, if we have related to them with a significant absence of power, if we've done our own healing and taken on the responsibility of parenting ourselves and taking care of us instead of asking our children to give us what our parents didn't, then they want to come back. They want to hang around us. Not because they should or because it's an obligation or a duty of a child to attend to the parents, but because it feels good to be around you, because you're safe. So when I talk about kind of the what can we do to prevent this need for somebody going no contact, as a father, I think about this more and more. It's to prioritize the relationship over behavior. And that doesn't mean to become a doormat. I wrote a blog a few years ago and it was published in Psychology Today, where I said why your child should be your friend. In contrast to the famous idiom that is, or the famous idea that is shared in the dominant culture, that you shouldn't be your child's friend. In my experience, a healthy relationship with a child looks a lot like a healthy relationship with a friend. Because in my friendships, I don't betray my own boundaries just to get them to like me, ideally, right? In a healthy relationship. I don't allow them to abuse me, to steal things from me, to disrespect my property, to say cruel things to me without saying something, without some reckoning. In healthy relationships, I still have work to do. So the idea is that the relationship with your child is much more like a relationship with Hey, folks, that was me. Sorry about this. So, prioritize the relationship over the behavior. My daughter once said to me that she was worried about, my adult daughter said she was worried about having a child, having worked with parents and children and seeing how children can struggle. And I thought that's a legitimate concern, right? You have a child that ends up with a mental health issue or an addiction. How terrifying and painful is that? Parents who are listening, many of you know what that's like. But as I thought about it for days, I realized that the glue is the relationship. And that even though we're going to have detours, even though we are going to have moments of pain and difficulty and conflict, if the relationship is prioritized, there's something to go back to. Often people come to me, usually in the case of a young adult, and says, my child has told me they don't want to have any contact or they want to limit contact with me. Often the things that the child cites are phrases like, you don't listen, you don't understand. When parents ask me, what do I say to that? My answer is say thank you. Honor it. Thank you for telling me how you feel. I understand this must be difficult. Sometimes even take notes. And then go to your mentor, to your sponsor, to your therapist with those notes that you've either taken in person or that you've written down, and ask questions and learn about yourself. Have the courage to consider, I might have some part in this, like I said at the beginning, at the outset, that is unconscious, that I wasn't aware of, that I wasn't even raised to know. So virtually the only realistic response to somebody who rises to the level of no contact is to say, I will honor it. If you're willing to tell me what it is, I'll listen, I'll take notes. Maybe even doing that with a therapist can be helpful. But gaslighting them reinforces the very idea. Rudolf Dreikurs famously said, the proper way of treating a child is the proper way of treating another human being. The longer I do this work, the more wisdom I see in how our relationships are more alike than they are different. My therapy clients aren't my family, but the way I show up as a therapist sometimes is healthier and larger than it is with my family. Now, it's not exactly the same because I have needs too in my personal relationships that I'm not going to impose on my clients. But again, there's so much that is similar. And if you are the recipient of somebody setting a no contact boundary with you, you're going to have grief. Go to a therapist, go to somebody who can support you in that, because your child can't. In fact, I would suggest the possibility that that might be what they're tired of doing, is taking care of your ego and your grief, parenting you. Some of the grief we have in this experience is for looking back and looking at our younger self and how we parented. If you don't have grief for the ways that you used to parent, I would suggest that you might not be growing. Grief for how your younger self parented your child is a sign of growth and maturity. As children grow up, they expose the immaturity of their parents. Parenting inevitably shows up, shows the parts of ourselves that we have avoided, that we haven't dealt with. And if you're the child in this equation, I want to empower you to know that. Most of the people that I know, most of the people that are educated in doing any kind of work, even if it's just a little bit of listening to a podcast or a self-help book here or there, but most people are improving on the previous generation's level of consciousness. That's the goal. The goal is my children are going to have a larger understanding of the psychology of what it means to be a human and love another than I did. I mean, I was raised by my mother and father, and I won't go into that here, but it was limited. And they were raised by their parents. And from the stories I've heard and for what I was able to bear witness to, that environment was fairly limited. So part of our discomfort and our growing pains is that we're constantly having this evolution, generation after generation, that stretches us, that pulls us, that asks us to look at parts of ourselves that previous generations didn't allow for. I love this quote that I read this week. I couldn't find it, but it says something like, if you don't befriend your demons, they will end up raising your children. And let me pick this apart. First of all, why do we call them demons or devils? Well, we call them that because we were told to fear them. I read something this week that said, I'm afraid to give up my demons because the minute I do, I'm afraid that my angels will go with them. And while that might sound really mystical and new agey, it makes sense because our wounds lie right beside our gifts. What made us unique as a child, right? That's what myths and stories show you. Early in the character's arc, you will often see them with these kind of raw gifts that they are punished for or ostracized for, that cause them or the people around them great pain. But later in the same story, you'll see this person bring to bear the wisdom, the treasure that was embedded in that gift. So the reason we call them demons and devils is because they were used to scare us. Those words were used to scare us. When in reality, the idea is to go back to the shadow side, to the parts of yourself that you were told were selfish or bad, and to understand them, because they hold great creative and regenerative power. If you can learn to integrate them, you'll have much more access to all the power that you were born with, that you sacrificed for the sake of proximity to an adult caregiver. If you don't befriend your demons, they will end up raising your children. I shared this next quote from last week's podcast because I want to share it again because I just thought it was so good, so relevant. From Carl Jung, the first step in individuation is tragic guilt. To as my daughter said, to a group of people, to break free from family traditions, to break free from my family's dysfunction, she said, I experienced tremendous guilt. And I go to therapy so that my therapist can help me to carry that guilt, can carry part of it for me. Getting better, getting healthier will inevitably trigger guilt in you. You can all think of examples of doing something healthy that would cause you guilt, setting a boundary, saying no, saying I can't, making a decision like this in a relationship. And so once you accept the idea, because it's obvious, because we can think of hundreds of examples of it in our lives, once you accept the idea that guilt is present when you're doing healthy things, when you're growing, then you realize that guilt is not a reliable source of morality. And most of what gets involved with our defensiveness is the guilt, the shame. We want to be good. And it doesn't help just to have people tell you you're a good father, a good mother, a good partner, a good son, or a good daughter. That's the old message. That's nonsense. The fact of the matter is you're human. And whatever is, quote unquote, not good is the unhealed part of you. The demons, right? The devils that we were just talking about, that need your attention, that need your listening ear and your heart. They need to have their voice heard. And what happens is they soon unmask themselves, not as demons or as devils, but as the lost child, the scared child. The great teacher Ram Dass said it this way. He said, a lot of people try to counteract the I am not good enough with I am good enough. In other words, he explained, they take the opposite and they try to invest it. But he explained and warned that still keeps the world at the level of polarities. The art is to go behind the polarities. So the act is not to go to the world of I am good to counteract I am bad, or I am lovable as opposed to I am unlovable, but to go behind it to I am. I am. I am. And I am includes the fact that I do crappy things and I do beautiful things. And I am. That includes everything. And I am. It is a transcendence. It is a deconstruction of the ideas of good and bad. That just through traditions of human beings for our need to group together. Historically. We had to kind of all believe in the same myth. Right? We all had to subscribe to the same rules. The same ideas. Because on our own, we were pathetically vulnerable. But in groups of 30 or 100 people, historically speaking, we could do a lot. Now, with the world being as connected as it is, you see progress, quote unquote, moving exponentially. Carl Jung once observed, I have frequently seen people become neurotic when they content themselves with inadequate or wrong answers to the questions of life. And the reason I included this quote in tonight's podcast is because most of us have accepted the wrong answers to life's most important questions. And so therapy is an unlearning. I was talking to a client recently, and basically in sharing his history with me, I observed, I said, it sounds like your previous treatment providers were just institutionally guilting you, scaring you into good behavior. That they were just taking the dominant culture's ideas and they repackaged them under the heading of being a therapist or a therapeutic program, and they imposed them on you. This stuff I'm talking about is different than that. This is not about good and bad, right and wrong. This is a higher morality than that. This is about what is. This is about the truth. This is about unlearning the untruths, like you're only as happy as your least happy child. That insane notion. Or the idea that you can become a good person. The people that we actually look up to historically talk freely about their humanness, their mistakes. It's only the narcissist who talks about how great they are all the time. That is, in essence, the narcissistic wound on display. And when you haven't come to terms with the fact that you weren't seen, and therefore you have this wound, this need to be seen as good, and if you don't deal with that, you'll impose that trauma onto your child. That's how your demons go about raising your children if you don't heal. You have to accept yourself. You have to come to terms with who you are. You have to find a compassionate, non-judgmental, patient mirror. If somebody chooses no contact with you, let them. Like I said, ask for clarification, take notes. And more important to me than you apologizing is knowing what you did, understanding it. Like I said, you can go to therapy, go to your therapist, ask questions. My mother has done that on a couple of occasions when I've set really clear boundaries with her. In fact, the last time this happened, she actually asked me to write down 3 or 4 things that I was having a problem with, and she said that would be really helpful. And she went back to her therapist with that list and then wrote me a letter a couple of weeks later, a very, very nice amends letter. Go to their therapist so they can ensure their safety. And then welcome them back when they're ready to reconnect. If you're considering choosing no contact, you don't have to prove that you're right. You don't have to make your case airtight. You get to decide. Now, one of the critiques of tonight's podcast could be, well, there are people with mental health disorders who go in and out of relationship on a whim. And I suppose that's true. I know what those diagnoses are. But I don't know how to teach what I'm teaching and pay attention to those outliers. The fact of the matter is, I won't decide if my children choose to go no contact. I won't impose upon them my views of their pathology. I'll provide space for that. And in so doing, I demonstrate to them that I am one of the safe people. You don't have to prove that you're right. You can try talking to the person first, of course, or you don't have to, but you can. I like to think that in most cases, if they're really important to me, I will try talking to them first. In the cases where I have set no contact, I have tried to talk to people. And their response has been even more punishing, almost an exaggeration of the very thing I was pointing out that I needed to go no contact for in the first place. Sometimes if the relationship isn't important to me, I won't try talking to them because if it's somebody on the periphery, I might not try talking to them because it takes too much energy. And I can choose who's what. I get to choose. You get to choose. We get to choose. Like I said, try having a therapist as a mediator. Ideally, it's the therapist of the person who's been hurt, so they can assure that they're protected and taken care of. If you're the other person, then go to your therapist afterwards. Get support with helping with the guilt that's going to come. And most importantly, how people respond when we tell them how we feel shows us who they are. And when it is really important for me to try to talk to somebody, I say, the reason I am talking to you is because I don't want to lose you. The reason I'm talking to you is because as uncomfortable as this is, and I'll say it's shaking, I'll be shaking. Maybe not visibly, but I'm shaking inside. And the reason that I am stepping into this fire to tell you this is because I want to stay in a relationship with you. You're that important to me. But again, if the person is so fragile, so stuck on the idea that they need to be good and have no fault, then I'm up against a wound, a disorder, a pathology, a mental health issue that I can't really make any progress with. Somebody once said a healthy boundary is the distance between me and you at which I can love me and you simultaneously. If the relationship requires you to abandon yourself, it's not a real connection. So it's not about being a doormat. It's not about being self-centered. It's about finding you. When people come to me in any relationship, say, I don't want to be a doormat. My response is, oh, who would? Of course not. And I don't want to be self-centered. Of course not. Nobody wants to be a jerk just for the sake of being a jerk. Nobody just wants to stand on that ground holier than thou and be right. So the question to ask yourself is, who are you? What can you do? What are you willing to put up with? Where do you willing? There are compromises we make in relationships. Nobody's perfect. And that's not what I'm teaching about tonight. But there comes a point at which it's too much. And I get to decide. And here's the crazy thing about too much. That changes day to day for me. I might not have any energy after this and be very unavailable. That means I'm in a place where I can't do much. Whereas other times I might have a tremendous amount of energy and be able to hold a tremendous amount of pain and anger and frustration by my loved ones or by my clients. So that's why I can't answer the question. People come to me and say, what should I say? What should I do? It doesn't make sense. I will sometimes answer like, I might do this, or this is what I might do in that situation, but don't follow me because my history is so different. How I feel is different. And if you just mirror or mimic what I say and don't have your soul in it, don't really feel it, it's crazy making for the other person because they can feel at an unconscious level the real feelings. So the question becomes, who am I? And the only one that can answer that question is you. I've been sharing this thought recently, but I want to put it in context. It's funny because when I say what I'm about to read and highlight the part that I'm about to read, it's like I want to make sure that people understand this comes from a spiritual, loving, whole place. This is not knee-jerk. This is what it means to differentiate, to individuate, to become a person, to be capable of greater love. I borrow this poem from Khalil Gibran from his book, The Prophet. For those of you who don't know him, he lived from 1883 to 1931. And this particular poem is called On Children. And a woman held a babe against her bosom and said, "Speak to us of children." And he said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. I've been sharing lately this idea, your children are not yours. I remember during my big midlife crisis around 40, I remember thinking, I am mine. I am me. You know, I walk into a room and I can feel the pull. I can feel the needs of others. It is both my gift and my wound. It is what makes me the therapist that I am, and also what makes me my codependent self. It's both. I can feel what people want me to be, what they need from me. And I am always tempted to give it to them at the expense of whatever it is I need and want at the time. So what Khalil Gibran is saying is, they're not yours. We don't own them. It is their life. And our over-identification with them is a wound from childhood, from your parents. And if you've accepted the way that your parents parent and what they taught you and what the dominant culture or what they're teaching you over the pulpit or at the school or on the podcast, if you just accept what other people are saying is the task of parenting, you are avoiding your work. You're avoiding your responsibility in this life. You get to decide. You have to decide. You're the only one who can decide. And if you choose to outsource your morality, your truth to somebody else, that's still your choice. I had a client recently say to me that he spent most of his time trying to teach his children what it was like to be in other people's shoes. And my response to him is, I don't think that's the job. I understand that. I understand that churches and people teach things like that, but that's not the way it works. You teach a child to be connected to themselves. You teach a child how to feel. You lend them your nervous system to help them to co-regulate. They borrow the sense of safety from you. And the empathy grows out of that. But because people have so little experience with this kind of deep work, they try to teach empathy. How would the other person feel? And they don't know that the fundamental issue in a lack of empathy is having not been empathized with, is having been objectified oneself and being told to do the right thing no matter how one feels. When a child learns how to feel, they see feelings and humanity in other people. They see the humanness, the humanity in others. And they respond with kindness and generosity and love. But when a child is behaviorally taught to be nice and good to people, they're being taught to have an ego, to be the good person, the good friend, the good whatever. And any feeling or anger that comes their way will be defended off, put back on the other person. And that's ultimately why I think it's important at times to go no contact with people. You can't talk your family members into understanding you, and it's not your job. You cannot explain yourself to somebody who doesn't have some lived experience with what I'm describing. And the people who have a lived experience with it, they won't need an explanation. Right? When I have a client or a friend trying to justify their feeling, my response is, I believe you. You don't have to prove it. I trust you. I take you at face value. So what are the take-home messages? Feelings towards a parent are not a measure of the child's mental health. When parents say to me, well, my child's angry, my response is, well, there's a few reasons that could be the case. One of which is there's a valid reason, of course. So if your child is pushing away, if your child is distancing, part of that is natural development, of course. But if it becomes very rocky, one might ask oneself, I wonder why it needs to be rocky. I wonder why it's not safe to do it gracefully. I wonder if there are some beliefs that I have about parenting that need to be reconsidered. And I wonder if my parents and their ideas need to be reconsidered. See, that's the experience of being in psychotherapy with another person. Because that other person is present, has a different sensibility, a different way of looking at the world, one can now question one's own childhood. It becomes, in essence, contrived. Not the truth, not the final say on things, just one version of how life could have gone. We work on ourselves to build a healthy relationship with ourselves. Then we move to the child, to the family. If the relationships in your family ask too much of you and you get to decide that, I don't, it becomes incumbent on you, your responsibility to yourself, to set the needed boundaries all the way up to no contact. And if you experience guilt, which you will in most cases, then there's some deeper work to look at your history and what you've been taught about relationships. In contrast, if you grew up in a family where boundaries were respected, where the relationship was important, and you try to set a boundary with somebody and they don't respond, there's no discussion or question. You simply walk away and you say to them, I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to be right. I don't have to justify this. I don't have to make an airtight case. I get to decide. I am mine. And that's not selfish or self-centered. That is the foundation of love. Love toward yourself and then others. We show our children and our spouses and the people that we love, we show them that we love them by doing our work, by taking back our shadow. I may have shared this the other day, but I was driving with my son, my adult son, home from the hospital with his newborn baby. The mother was in the back seat with the baby. And my son said, I'm just so anxious. And I said, that's so beautiful. When I was your age, 32, I don't think I would have said I was anxious. I would have just beat everybody up about it in the car. I would have made them the problem, lashed out. And then my daughter-in-law said, I'm anxious too. And I said, I think you guys are going to be okay. I think you're going to make this. If you can own your feelings of fear, which is really what this is all about, owning your anxiety, your child won't have to carry it. And my daughter-in-law made the joke. She said, well, I think I can own it and beat people up at the same time. And we all laughed. And I thought, touche, that's a good point. But that's part of the work. I think the most damaging thing in the relationship between the parent and child is the unowned anxiety and fear of the parent. And when it's unowned, they make the child the identified patient, the one responsible, the one causing the misery, causing the fear. And for the child, that is a great burden to carry. And on top of whatever else they're struggling with, that adds to the weight, adds to the pathology. Finally, until we look at ourselves and consider how we have contributed to the difficulties in our relationships, we are forever lost And we imagine to ourselves that what is happening to us is random, is simply fate. All right, folks. Sorry for the disconnection. Something went wrong with the platform. My internet was working and all the other websites were working, but this one wasn't. As I said at the outset, my 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. The next Finding You, the last one of 2025 that I will be facilitating, is August 13th through 17th. It is filling up. And then September 3rd is the next offering after that, on October 1st. If you want a coach or a therapist who works in this model, contact us on our website or by emailing us at info@findingyouprograms.com. You can also, any inquiries, any suggestions, private intensives, info@findingyouprograms.com. I'll be hosting the 5-day workshop at the Omega Institute this fall, October 12th through 17th in Rhinebeck, New York. $500 for 5 days. It's called The Audacity to Be You. So if you're interested, go to the Omega website, eomega.org. That's eomega.org. Go to the workshops and look under the Audacity to Be You and sign up and inquire there. I'm going to be out the rest of this week and next week. So look for broadcasts to be dropping on the podcast app, but I won't have any live episodes. But I have 3 coming up on with some experts on obsessive compulsive disorder and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So those will be dropping in the next week. Look for those on any of your podcast apps. Any questions, any suggestions for books to review or other topics, anything Finding You, email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. Sorry about the problem earlier. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thanks for showing up to this kind of work. You doing your work and taking back your shadow, your responsibility for your stuff makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening. I'll talk to you when I get back. Bye-bye.